So React, as I was saying, is an abstraction. So it's essentially a framework or a library, if you want, to build UI. User interfaces, right? So it's a library that will allow us to build user interfaces. When I say user interfaces, it's anything that you can see on a web browser, right? Any web application that you can access through a web browser, that has a user interface. For example, the 4Geeks interface, right? You can enter, you can see all the modules, you can interact with the modules, you can send your homework, you can open the lessons, etc., right? So that's the experience, the user interface. Now, this website, this web application is also built in React. So we're going to learn React. We're going to start learning React today. Of course, this is the content that we will focus the rest of the program, right? Because this is the skill that we want to learn. All the rest was foundational. It was HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the DOM, the document object model, and now we get to React. Now, with React, we basically encapsulate everything into a single user or developer experience, right? Because with React, we don't have to go from website, so from file to file, to change the HTML here, and then go change the CSS in another file, and then go change the JavaScript in another file, right? Remember when we were working on the JavaScript projects, every page, every content like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript will all separated in different files, right? Now with React, we have everything in a single file in the form of a component, right? So this is the most important part of React. Everything is a component, okay? And what is a component? Anything that you can see on a web page is a component, from the smallest button to the full page, right? So any web page that you can see that is built on React, for example, in this page, everything that you see on the page is a component. And some components can be created using other components. For example, you can see that we have, let's say, this section here, right? This section here, I might call this a module item, right? And I can reuse that same module item in many ways, in many places, right? Now that's a component. But the button, the green check mark that you see on the end of that can also be a component, right? So anything can be a component. Now the whole page is also a component. So you can see that everything that you see in a web page is no longer, I mean, you can have HTML tags, but most of the things that you see on a web page are components, okay? And components can have HTML tags and can have all the components. So let's see how these components work, and we understand better how this. So a component, let me put an example. For example, if I go to the Netflix website, and I use this example a lot, right? So Netflix, actually, I will have to open the Netflix. So for example, here, this page. In this page, I can see multiple components. I can say, well, the title on the top that says who's watching this now is a component. Every profile that I have in my account is a component. The button to administer profile is a component. Now, when I open the page, every video is also a component, and every component has its own interaction, right? And then a group of components can create another component. For example, this row, you see that it's the same over and over. So perhaps this is another component, right? The ones that have the title and then a row of movies. So what I'm saying is that every part of the page has a different set of components. Now, let's try to see what a component is in React. So a component in React is essentially a small part of the UI that has its own HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So all the functionality is in a single file, right? So when you are tracking or you are developing something, you don't have to go through 3 different files or multiple different files to be able to change something. You can go to a single file and change everything there. And let's see what that file is. And a component in React is essentially this. It's a function, right? So every component is a function. Now the function name must be, sorry about that, capitalized. In other words, using Pascal case notation, right? So remember we use camel case notation for variables, right? Camel case is essentially the same as Pascal case, but the first letter is lowercase. In Pascal case, the first letter is always uppercase, so capitalized. This way we can identify what function is a component versus other functions that are not components. So the function name must be capitalized. And the function should return any of these items. It could be returned null. It could return GSX, and we will learn what GSX is in a minute, or an array of null or GSX. So when I say return, is, remember, every function is a component. So if I'm making a component for, I don't know, something in the page, let's say I'm making a component for these 2 items here. So 2 buttons, right? I will call this actions, right? That will be my actions component. So the way I create that component is saying, okay, function, because it's a function, and the name of the component should be capitalized. So actions, action buttons, right? Now I have to return something that is null, GSX, on an array of null and GSX. Now, if a component returns null, right, the visual rendering of that component, what is nothing, right? It's empty. So that's what null means. Now, GSX is the notation of JavaScript. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's JavaScript extended syntax. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what GSX means. Now, GSX is a way to write HTML inside JavaScript, right? If you remember from the last profile card exercise, we had, I will put something here that's not complete yet, but in that exercise, we have a function called render, right? You remember that function, render? And that function receives variables. And what we were doing inside was rendering a profile card using templates. So we were having something like this: document, query selector. I don't remember what we had here. And then we were doing inner HTML. And we had like a template. And inside that template, we have things like the variables.name. So we have something like this in our exercise for profile card. Now, we're going to take this to the next level. And the next level is exactly React, right? Instead of having a render function, we will have a function that has the name of the component that I'm creating, right? By the way, a single application is composed by multiple components, right? You can have one component for the whole app, but from there you can have hundreds, if not thousands, of components, right? If you go to an application like, for example, Instagram, you will have thousands of components. If you go to an application like a bank or any other, you will have thousands, because everything in the page that is different is a new component, right? And it has its own functionality. Now, instead of doing something with the DOM, we're just returning the whole template as GSX. And the difference with JSX is that we don't need to use the string templates anymore, so we don't have to do this. We can just directly into the code return something that resembles HTML. Now, it's not exactly HTML, it's JSX, and there are differences. The first difference is we don't need to use backticks, right? We can just write it right there in the code. The second difference is when you want to replace variables, you don't have to use $ curly brackets. You can just put curly brackets, and everything that you put inside will be replaced, right? Whatever expression that means, it will be replaced in the rendering. And this is our component essentially, right? It's a function, returns null JSX or an array of null JSX, and the name is capitalized, right? Now, once we create a component, of course, we need to put that component in the page, right? The way we use the component in the page is by calling it instead of as a function. So because this is a function, technically I should be able to do this, right? Because it's a function. I'm calling it in JavaScript as a function. But because this is a React component, I have to call this as an actual tag, right? So instead of calling it as a function, I'm using it as an HTML tag. Now, the difference is that, of course, tags in HTML are all lowercase. So when you see something like this and something like this, right, you know that the first one is the native HTML tag for button, and the second one is a class, it's a component called button that basically can implement anything, right? So that's for now what we're going to learn about React. Essentially, we can create components. Components are, the name of the components are capitalized, and components should return something as null JSX or an array of null JSX. When I say an array of null JSX, it's because sometimes we can return something like this and say, okay, I want to return a div, and then I want to return another div. Right? So I'm returning 2 elements from that React component. If I'm returning only one, I don't have to put it in an array. I can just return that element. Okay? Cool. I know that you have a lot of questions, but let's see React in practice. Now, I didn't give you the introduction, like historic introduction of what React is and where it was created. It was basically created at Facebook almost 10 years ago, if not more, probably 11 years ago. And it was created by a software engineer at Facebook. They started using it in some part of the application. Today it's probably using the whole Facebook. I mean, I haven't used Facebook for a long time, so I don't know if they're still using React in all of Facebook. But I know that Instagram is built with React, Twitter is built with React, Netflix is built with React, probably your bank application is built with React. Most of the web, new applications, not all applications, is built with React, right? And your platform, sorry, your your 4Geeks Academy website is built for React. By the way, I have a React extension in the browser. You see that this website was built with React. Any web page that is built with React will tell you there. The website, the React website, of course, was built with React as well. This is GitHub, also built with React. So pretty much everything is built with React now, right? Now, React started on the web, and after some while, it was also added to the mobile, so you can actually create mobile applications using React as well. You can build mobile applications for Android, iOS, and Windows. So Windows Phone also have React. You can create, and they are native applications. They are not mobile websites. They are native applications, right? It's just that you build it with React and JavaScript. So the skill set, what I'm saying is that the skill set that you learn with React can be applied to create web applications and can be applied to build mobile applications as well. Okay, so let's see some examples of React applications app. For that, I have the React website. It's pretty cool. So this is an example of a component, right? And you can see there that the component name is video, right? It's a capital V. So, and it's returning this. This is JSX, as you can see there, and it has a div. Notice that every component that I'm hovering is highlighting on the right? So this is the whole div. Now this is the thumbnail. It's another component. Notice that it has a capital T, so that means that it's a component. Of course, I cannot change this. There is a tag, so an anchor tag, so a link. This is H3 that is inside. This is the P tag that is inside, and this is the like button that is right there, right? So as you can see, this is a React component, but now technically I can use that same component multiple times, right? Because I have a video component, I only have to pass some properties. By the way, React components, and that's the third, I think that's the third part that we have to learn today. React components can also take one single property. It's an object. Similar to the render function that we have in the exercise from last Monday, right? It has a single object, a single property, a single parameter called properties, and I can say properties, right? And what can I do with those properties? I can extract attributes from that property parameter. So I can do something like this, prop.name. Right? That means that when I want to use this component, action buttons, I have to pass property. And the way we pass these properties is via the attributes. Remember, in HTML, every HTML tag can pass attributes, right? Like, for example, the image tag has the source attribute, and you can pass the location of the image, or the input tag has the type attribute that defines what is the type of input that I want, right? So similar to that, in the React components, we can also use attributes. All right? And those attributes can basically pass in the properties and used for rendering. Now, every time we change the properties, these components get re-rendered again, right? So if I put action buttons with the name John, it will render something like div, whatever, John div, right? Now, if I change the attribute to Mary, that same component that already was on the screen saying John will change and show Mary, right? Because the component stays on the page, and every time the properties change, the component gets re-rendered again. So it gets refreshed, okay? Cool, so let's see how that works in here. So this is an example. As you can see here, we have a video property, and from that video, we get the URL, the video title, video description, and the video, right? Now, I can also have, and this is an example of composition, right? I have a component called video, right? This is the particular render of a video. It's just that whole section. Now, I can use that component in a video list. And that video list component will show how many videos I have, and notice that the heading is how many videos do I have, right? If it's if the videos are more than one, it will say 3 videos. If it's only one video, it will say 1 video, right? So that's the heading. That's the variable heading. And then it will map through all the videos, because videos is a list, right? It's an array. And for every video, it will show the elements. So it will show the same component 3 times for every video that I have. And that's an example of composition. Cool. And well, this is another sample of composition. Now you see that I'm using the video list and I'm passing a found videos, right? So you see where I'm going with this is that you go from the smallest component and you go up to take that component and put it in bigger components, and bigger components, and bigger components, and now you have basically a page that allows you to search for videos, right? And every time you change the search and every time you had a new set of videos, the set automatically refreshes. You don't have to do anything. So what I'm saying here is that the nice thing about React is that you are converting essentially from data, right? You're converting from data to a view, right? And this is basically rendering. Every time the data changes, the component gets rendered and the view gets refreshed, right? So data changes, render, view. For now, we only have one source of data, and it's the parameters, the properties that we pass to that component. In future classes, we will learn how to add more types of data to that component. For now, we only have one type of data. It's the props that we can pass, right? Cool. So in essence, that's React. Now, this is just 20% of React, right? There is more classes around how to handle state, how to connect to a backend, how to make some routing, how to work with, I don't know, CSS, etc., right? How to work with a framework. We will have classes for all of that. But in essence, React is essentially components, right? Now, let's see an example. I have an example here of a component. So this is an example of a button. Let me see. Okay, a button component and a my app component, right? Now, my app component is what you see in the whole page, and notice that well, it's not this the one that I was changing. Let me change it. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so here I can change the component. Let's change my button, for example. Now I call it type button. See? Now I'm using the button only once in my app. If I put it again, notice that now I have 2 buttons, right? Now, what if I want to change the text of the button? I want to create a component that is more customizable, right? I will say, okay, props. Remember, components can accept one single property, and that property is an object. And I would take from that prop, I would take a label. So now I have to specify for my button what's the label that I want. Click me or don't click here. So you see, it's the same component, but in this instance, the label is click me. And in the second instance, is don't click here, right? And they are both the same component. So it's easy to create interfaces where you are using components and basically reusing them for other purposes, right? Because right now, this component, they all look the same. But if I change the styles of the component, by the way, I don't have any other styling classes, so I will use the style. All of them will look the same, right? Now, if I change that red, let's say I want to put props color. So now I can say color red, and this is color blue. So you see where I'm going with this is that you can create components, you can create properties in that component, and every time you use that component, you have to specify the properties, and that component will use the properties to render itself, right? Being a label, being a style, being a behavior, because right now we're just making components that visually change the behavior, but in the future we can create components that also work in a different way, right? Cool. Now, let me stop this here, and okay, let me stop this here.